This is Andrew Stotz of Stotz Investment Research looking at the Malaysia Equity FVMR Snapshot. Remember, FVMR stands for Fundamentals, Valuation, Momentum, and Risk. All right, let's take a look at Malaysia. First thing we can see is that the ROE of Malaysia is about 10% versus about 12 to 13% for the world. So the overall profitability of Malaysian companies is slightly lower. Now I'm going to skip ahead here to look at, the EPS growth expectations of analysts. And we can see it's very low in 2017, only 1% expected growth compared to about 13% for the rest of the world. And then it goes up to about 7 versus the rest of the world, about 11. So we've got a low ROE situation and a low growth expectation situation. Now let's take a look at the PE, and we can see that the PE of the market's about 16 or 17 times versus, we can see it's just slightly more expensive than the world. So you get lower ROE and a lower earnings growth for about the same price. And hence, the market hasn't been that attractive recently. On a price-to-book value basis, it's looking even cheaper. And that could just be because that's very correlated with the ROE versus the PE, which is a little bit more about earnings growth. Now, let's take a look at what's been happening in the share price, and we can see that the market has gone up by about 2% versus the world market's going up about 12%. So it's also been underperforming on momentum, both in earnings and as we see there in price. Now, if we look at the volatility, it is a low volatility market and it tends to be very low. And also we can see that leverage of Malaysian companies is pretty low. So I would say it is a weak fundamentals and momentum country that's a little bit expensive, but it has low risk. So not super attractive at this point in time. Now let's look at some of the sectors, and we can see that the energy sector is trading on about 4 times. Now, it's making an ROE of about 4%. And that we can see in the earnings per share has been falling quite dramatically and expecting a little bit of a recovery. And here in the EPS side, we can see that that's a big growth. So it's a cyclical business. Oil prices have been rising a bit, so they're getting some benefit from that. The expensive sector right now is the telecom sector at about 17 times. Did I say expensive? I meant to say the high ROE sector is telecoms, and it's also expensive. Here it is at about 25 times ROE. Now, what's interesting here is look at the healthcare sector, almost 40 times, and the ROE is low, but earnings growth is strong, and that's where you can see the correlation between PE and earnings growth versus the ROE and price to book, which is a low ROE and not a particularly expensive price to book. So it's a little bit expensive, but it's got growth, and that's part of the attraction there for that sector. Most of the other sectors look pretty darn expensive. Look at energy, cyclical. Materials cyclical, industrials a bit cyclical. So those are all a little bit expensive as they start to see some recovery. And overall, if we look at the price performance, we can see the biggest hit has actually been the healthcare sector. Again, that's the risk of buying high PE stocks, is that they can come down quite a bit. There does seem to be some recovery going on in the materials sector there. And if we look at gearing, well, nice to see very low gearing for most of these sectors. So not bad on the gearing front. And then finally, what sectors are most volatile? Well, let's take a look at that, and we'll see that the energy sector is number 1 volatility, followed by the consumer discretionary sector. The lowest volatility sector is utilities, as it should be, which is a reasonable ROE and a reasonable valuation and steady growth and a little bit of decline, but nothing fantastic, and therefore a very low volatility. So there you go. Malaysia tends to be, it's a bit expensive for low profitability and low growth, but the risk is low. In fact, the risk is probably lowest in Malaysian utilities companies. Maybe that's a defensive strategy right there. Well, you want to see the FVMR snapshot for your country? Just leave a comment below and I'll make it and do it if I have it. Have a great day.